Oh, and we are live. Hey, folks, thanks for tuning in to our Savage World show. I don't know if I'm going to call it Savage Sundays or something cool like that, but occasional Sunday night show talking about stuff savage. I have Mr. Cameron Lyle here from the Bloodshadows Kickstarter. How are you doing, sir?
I am doing amazingly well. Thanks for having me.
I appreciate you being here. Before we get started, I'm contractually obligated to play this audiovisual introduction that assures listeners and viewers that we are a high-quality, high production value podcast. So just give me 1 second. I'm going to make a mixed, just a compilation of my co-hosts dancing one day, because everyone seems to. So, now that everyone's been assured that this is a quality show, folks, and let's introduce my co-hosts. Frequent co-host, Jacob Blackman, artist, dancer, singer. Is there anything he can't do? Jacob, welcome to the show.
I'm sure there are things I can't do there. Just take me a moment to think of them.
Perhaps jiu-jitsu.
That I am not a martial arts expert at all.
I tried jiu-jitsu, but I was a Gentile. They wouldn't let me in. And Sean Noakes in the lower right-hand corner, over here. Author of The After for Savage Worlds.
Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate you showing up, Sean. And let's talk about all things savage. Cameron, let's say I am just a naive summer child who stumbles into this podcast on a whim, and I'm like, what is Bloodshadows for Savage Worlds? How would you give that person the elevator pitch?
All right. So I would say the elevator pitch is what would happen if Sam Spade got dropped into Middle Earth. It is essentially a mixture of noir, horror, and fantasy. You might recognize, if you're old enough to have been around watching movies in the early to mid 90s, Cast a Deadly Spell, which was an HBO film and one of the primary inspirations for Bloodshadows. So it's kind of, if you take sort of a fantasy world with horror elements and then look at it with a noir sensibility, that is Bloodshadows in a nutshell.
Awesome. And we've decided to bring that vibe to Savage Worlds. Yes,
absolutely. It's really, to me, it's a perfect fit. There's actually quite a bit of sort of history and symmetry between the Bloodshadows setting and its mechanics that you can trace all the way through to Savage Worlds. Shane Hensley got his start writing for Torg for West End Games way back in the day. The system for Torg became Masterbook. And the first setting for Masterbook was Bloodshadows, which Shane Hensley also wrote for. So
I did not know that. That's interesting backstory.
That's what I'm here for. Useless historical trivia.
That's pretty. No, I mean, you guys have you don't get a better Savage Worlds pedigree than Mr. Shane Hensley.
Yeah, and of the modern games out there that have a modern design sensibility, none, I feel, are sort of perfect for the Masterbook sensibility the way Savage Worlds is. Especially, I'm a huge proponent of the Adventure Deck, which is inspired by the Master Deck. And although we're keeping everything optional because not everyone's going to have the Adventure Deck, not everyone's going to want to use the Adventure Deck, on a personal level, I would highly recommend, if you want to play Bloodshadows and you really want to get the most out of it, get you an Adventure Deck and see some of the stuff that we're going to do with the Adventure Deck for Bloodshadows, because we really wanted to carry that sort of Master Deck legacy into the new Savage Worlds edition.
I would second that, as I played Bloodshadows back in the day when it originally came out for Master System. I was already a Torg fan back then as well, and the cards were a literal game changer, because the GM could throw cards out there and bring a random element into the game. players could play their cards to bring random elements of the game or to enhance what they were doing or to debuff what the bad guys were doing. The cards were an amazing system to augment what was already a fun game and setting.
Yeah.
Sweet. Well, hey, I'm looking at your Kickstarter page, and I see that there is a subtitle that I was heretofore unaware of. It is Bloodshadows: Chronicles of Guff.
Yes.
Could you give us the Guff, sir? Tell us what's going on with that.
Sure. All right. So, for those of you who might not be aware, the word Guff has a Hebrew origin and is specifically known through Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah. It is the vault or the treasury of souls. It is where all of the unborn souls are kept. So Guff is a new city in the world of Marl on the continent of Elm, which is where Bloodshadows takes place. It is newly discovered. It's only been around for about 10 years, a little bit less. And if you're not familiar with Bloodshadows, travel and finding new places is very difficult. So it's not unusual to find and discover sort of unknown places. Anyhow, what's so particularly special about this city is that almost everybody who's there is supposed to be dead. By which I mean people who folks from other cities in the world of Bloodshadows saw well and truly killed. I don't mean they're undead. I don't mean that they are, reanimated or shambling around due to magic. It's as if they are alive again, breathing, kicking, with their own entirely different lives in the city of Guff. And sometimes they have no memory of previous lives. Sometimes they remember things spotty, but remember wrong. And sometimes they don't remember how they got there, but they remember their previous lives completely. So it's not everyone in the city, but a huge amount of the population are people who should be well and truly dead from other places in Marl. No one quite understands why they're there, how they got there. They're called Scions, the inhabitants of Guff. But like a monkey's paw, in any good noir story, particularly a horror noir story, the past is never done with you. And people from all over Marl make their way to Guff through portals or risk traveling in the dangerous wilderness to get there because they want to see a loved one again, because there's a promise of some kind of reunion, or even because they whacked somebody and now they're terrified that that person that they killed is back alive again and is going to come hunt them down for revenge. So people from all over make their way to Guff to truck with the past again. And from here blooms a lot of smoke and shadow and secrets and detective stories as people try to figure out what's going on.
That is a really cool premise.
Thank you.
I've got a bunch of questions, but it occurs to me I've got a guy who's much more schooled in Savage Worlds than I am, and that's Mr. Sean Oakes. And Sean, I'm going to shut up for a second to let you ask maybe more Savage questions.
Yeah, I've got all kinds of questions about this. It sounds like it would almost fit a niche similar to Deadlands Noir, but without the baggage of needing to be in real-world North America, which I think is really exciting. You're able to come at it from a fresh perspective. And can you talk about what kind of brand new fantasy elements are coming to the table?
Sure. So first of all, Deadlands Noir is amazing. Like I love that game. So certainly not throwing anything remotely like shade there. We do, however, we want to be true and unique to the original Bloodshadows, and bring something of our own to the table that very much differentiates and distinguishes us. So on the lore side of things, the Bloodshadows lore is pretty rich and detailed as it is. It is not set in the real world. It is set in the world of Marl, which is largely unexplored. People live in cities that are often walled, at least the metropolises, so to speak. They're walled to keep out like the monsters and horrors that you might think of from fantasy and horror live in the wilderness outside of these cities. Inside the cities, mostly you have humans and you have entities that are close enough to human. Things like vampires, werewolves. There is a large number of races that are available to play. I'm, instead of just spitting out names that someone doesn't potentially know, I'm going to kind of describe. Like there's a race of four-armed humans. They're otherwise indistinguishable from people, but they have to deal with a lot of sort of targeted prejudice and otherness, and having people be afraid of them because they are quote unquote unnatural. There's a lot of shapeshifters. There are demons and undead. And of course, everybody uses magic. Magic is a common tool of industry in Bloodshadows. Not everyone uses like what we would think of as real significant sorcery. We're talking like what we call everyday magic, or industrial magic, wherein like you might think of it as a cantrip essentially, but it's folks that go to work and they use their fire magic because their job is to heat the water that's being distributed in the water pipes to, the brownstone down the street. While a water mage is using his magic to make sure that it's going to the right places. If you don't pay your bill, it gets shut off. So there's a very sort of industrial, low rent workaday magic. And then there is what you think of as like real, honest to goodness, studied and educated mages who are orders of magnitude above what the average Joe can do. But almost every average Joe can hold their cup of coffee and mutter a couple of words and heat it up again, So
is that going to be quantified on a character sheet, or is that kind of baked into the story of the world?
So both. It's definitely baked into the lore. Mechanically speaking, this translates into you do not need an arcane background in order to take the Powers Edge. If you don't take that arcane background, you don't get power points, though, which means you have to use modifiers to bring that cost down to 0, which is the equivalent of a cantrip, and that is the best you can do. You have to modify the power level down to that tiny little level in order to use the magic, and you only know one thing. You can't apply more modifiers to it or otherwise change it the way you could if you had an arcane background.
Well, that's a fun mechanic. Yeah, I like that. So what would the typical player character's journey look like? I mean, what's the kind of subject matter that a short campaign is going to deal with in this city?
Sure. So in the background of Bloodshadows is always sort of the specter of what's known as the Second God War. And in the original Bloodshadows, this was kind of a Cold War that people didn't really know or understand, sort of like just starting to heat up in the background. And supernatural creatures were sort of picking sides, and this war was beginning to happen. It's this contextualized as a fight between order and chaos as opposed to good and evil, which fits kind of the noir sensibility. Although it should be noted that order and chaos are not actually accurate descriptions of what these sort of gods represent. It's just as close as we can comprehend. So in the same way that in, for example, Casablanca, there's a war on in the background, right? It is not a story about war. It is not a story where you are necessarily in the trenches fighting a war, but the war touches everything.
It matters.
Yeah. So in order to accommodate the discovery of the city of Guff, and in order to accommodate sort of the dissemination of what it is and where we want to be in terms of our lore and story, we've had to advance the timeline from the original Bloodshadows, which means the Cold War that was just starting to heat up in the original Bloodshadows, people are now picking sides in the God War, or very decidedly not picking a side. So there's lots of opportunity in a war, even if you're not going to war, for shady activity, for black market kind of stuff, for private detectives, all of these sort of noir tropes, which is not surprising since a lot of noir fiction was kind of crafted and created in the era of World War II. So you're kind of looking at the underbelly of the world, regardless of where you fall on the ethics and morality scale, and attempting to unravel threads of mysteries and get a better sense of what is actually going on, both in what might be an individual case, if you say you're playing private detectives, if you decide you all want to play mobsters and criminals, then it might be trying to figure out, what's going on in terms of opposing criminal organizations, and suddenly, these people are trying to muscle in your turf, and turns out it's a blood cult trying to muscle in on your turf, and they want to muscle in on your turf because there's a MacGuffin that they want and need in order to, sacrifice someone and usher in a new era for their patron, deity or what have you. You look like you're about to say something.
No, just yeah. And there's a MacGuffin, and it's like a big giant book, and they want to bring the deity, like a strange creature.
Yeah.
I love that movie. So no, it's perfect. It's the perfect example.
I wanted to pass it over to Jacob, actually, since you're talking, Cameron, about kind of advancing the timeline of the classic game. I've never played classic Bloodshadows, but Jacob has. I'll bet he has some questions about how it interfaces with previous Bloodshadows products.
Well, I imagine other than the lore itself, the game, the game's going to be completely different because the game system. Master System and Savage Worlds are worlds apart. So, so I'm looking forward to seeing how Bloodshadows will be in Savage Worlds Adventure Edition, especially with the fact that you're continuing with the cards. Like I said, which is one of my favorite parts of that game.
Yeah, mine too. I freaking love the drama deck / master deck / adventure deck. Absolutely.
That's one thing that Savage Worlds does well. It has all those nice fiddly bits because the bennies and using the card decks for chase rules and all that sort of thing. It's got a little bit.
A lot of knobs to twist.
Yeah. We've actually been having a fantastic time. We were talking earlier about wanting to make sure that we felt distinct from Deadlands Noir, and we wanted to make sure that we felt true to Bloodshadows. So one of the first things that I did when we nailed down the license was, before I went back to the books, you can see they're kind of hanging out back there. Before I went back to the actual role-playing books, I busted out the novels and began reading through the novels again, because you kind of want to soak in the setting without any kind of mechanical bias as a starting point. And it had been a while since I'd really gone through. There's like 13 supplements, I think, for Bloodshadows. And I remember a lot, but not everything. So making sure that you nail down the lore is super important. You got to go back over everything with a fine-tooth comb. Well, as you begin going over this stuff, you start seeing, okay, like Jack Deacon is sort of the point of view character that they use in the old Bloodshadows stuff. And he's more of sort of a Sam Spade, Philip Marlowe kind of detective in the hard-boiled noir sense. So as I began reading through, I started thinking, all right, what are the setting rules that I really want to bring that are going to capture what's going on here and make us distinct and different from another noir game that might be in Savage Worlds? So the first thing we did was, all right, so these characters, most of them definitely embody that moral ambiguity that you find in noir characters. So we took the hindrances and we started dividing them. And we divided them into these sort of ruinous hindrances, which are sort of tragic flaws, bloodthirsty, mean. They are the ugly side of you. And then we started taking these sort of righteous hindrances, which are hindrances that might show a sign of something redemptive, code of honor, right? And then there are some that are neutral. And so we said, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to purposefully alter the Benny economy here. And the way this is going to work is that when you build your character, we want to encourage you to keep a balance of these sort of ruinous hindrances, these sort of righteous hindrances, and these neutral hindrances, to make sure that you're staying in the morally ambiguous zone. We don't want to forbid you, however, from creating, if you really want to create that sort of heroic paladin character, you never want to say, no, you can't. So, but we want to encourage you to participate. So the way we're doing that is that you can only earn bennies from ruinous hindrances. The righteous hindrances earn you conviction. And these are the only ways that you typically can earn those two resources. But those neutral hindrances, we wanted to do something kind of clever-ish, as clever as we can be with those. So we said, all right, noir as a genre is like flooded with cynical lone wolves, and a whole party of cynical lone wolves is just a pain, right? So we wanted to find a way to encourage group cohesion. And so we said, okay, fantasy, which is part of Bloodshadows, has this strong tradition of, pardon the pun, fellowship. And noir has this strong tradition of your relationships get you hurt. So we wanted to marry these in a strong way. So those neutral hindrances can earn other people in your party bennies or conviction, but not you. So, for example, let's say you're playing an unnatural. which is the sort of the general term for non-human races. And you're a detective, and you're trying to cut a deal with the local mobster because you need access to some of their weapons. And that mobster recognizes that you run with an unnatural. So they have the outsider hindrance, which is a neutral hindrance. This mobster has now recognized you and that you hang with the undesirables, and they're going to treat you like that. So you then have the outsider hindrance for this fellow, and you can earn bennies or conviction through that way. So your ties to this other character and their flaws now become another way that you can earn this positive resource. Your friends have your back, but they also cause you grief. And so we wanted to make sure that you had this idea of fellowship, but that it was seen through the noir lens. And so that's how we did it.
That's a problem I've seen a lot of discussion about for many games, is how do you make sure your players' characters want to be together?
Yeah. And it's, like I said, it's doubly so when, it's nothing but bitter, drunken lone wolves. Like the adventure's over, they all go to their corners of the room, steeped in shadow, pop out their bottles and, mumble about their backstories.
While sad piano and trombone music plays.
Exactly.
Somewhere it's raining. There's a dog barking in the darkness. I'm just going along with the vibe, guys. It's cool.
It's fine. It's fine.
So another consideration I was thinking of in regards to the expanding timeline and lore is one of the problems I had with the original Bloodshadows was I always felt it was kind of competing with World of Darkness in trying to be one of those grim settings. Noir traditionally is very grim. So I was thinking, considering your advancing the timeline and your heating up what had been this Cold War of what are some of the more possibilities of expanding this system into kind of like a pulp-like genre where you could have pulp fantasy adventure.
So, realistically speaking, you're only a couple of steps away from that if you decide that is the direction that you want to go in. And as a matter of fact, Jonathan Thompson, the fellow behind Battlefield Press, who is the publisher of Bloodshadows, has a pretty fantastic pulp book called Pulp Fantastic, which you can get via the Kickstarter as a companion piece to Bloodshadows if you decide you want to take it into a more pulpy kind of a direction. One of the great things about Bloodshadows is that as a frame, it is drawing on 3 genres that have a lot of different avenues of approach to take that can have very different feelings or flavors depending on what your sort of preference is. There's certainly no end of sort of pulp noir, and there's not a shortage of, for example, dark fantasy, or if you want to go epic fantasy for those elements, and the same again with horror. There's a pretty enormous difference between your sort of hard R, ultra violent monster fest, and something more tongue in cheek like an Army of Darkness or what have you. So the 3 genres that we are mixing together offered themselves a pretty good playground for GMs who feel like they want to experiment a little bit out of the box with what they get.
Cool. Excellent.
So can we
ahead,
talk a
Sam.
little bit more about the people that show up from everywhere that everyone thought was dead? It sounds like you could range in stories from Snake Plissken, oh, I thought you were dead, to like the Crow. I mean, how serious does that get? And does that mean that there's a potential in-game element for a PC or a villain who ends up dead to come back? Is that a thing that's quantified, or is that kind of left up to the GM?
So I will say this. In the very first Bloodshadows novel, before we ever approach the current point in the timeline, the main character, Jack Deacon, just flat out dies and goes to the afterlife and gets dragged back. So resurrection is already a thing, but typically it's at the direction of an extremely powerful supernatural being or mage. This is just a city that folks discovered, and a lot of the people that live there seem to have had complete whole lives from birth until now, whatever age they are, in this place, which confuses the heck out of everyone because they look exactly like your loved one, they talk exactly like your loved one, they have your loved one's personality. Sometimes they even have your loved one's memories or little glimpses and slips of their memory. So what does this all mean? That's kind of one of the primary mysteries of the game. Guff is... Oh, that's terrible. Sorry, bad pun alert. Guff is, in this way, our MacGuffin. And...
So is the intention for player characters to have that backstory of being someone from somewhere else, or is that purely a mystery for them to uncover as part of the campaign?
They can be either people from other places in Marl, or they can play Scions. The primary thrust of the campaign is going to be in Guff. However, we wanted to make sure for folks who maybe they're like, I don't know how I feel about the God War heating up. I want to play something more classic. We're going to have a lot of information on all of the other cities that have been detailed already in Bloodshadows. We want to make sure that folks who decide, I want to play in the classic timeline, all they really need to do is pick up the books and just say, all right, well, we just cut the timeline here. And they can still play, while also bringing something new to the table for people who maybe did play and love the original game but want something new or more, or someone who's just coming to the table who's like, I want to know what this crazy thing's all about.
Can I ask what your playtest session was like?
You can ask what my playtest sessions have been like.
I was just wondering, because as a GM, my first thought is, I want to run a whole team of PIs, and then I'm like, that could be hard. And then I'm thinking it's a PI agency, and I'm like, well, I wonder about how Cameron, what adventures he ran for his playtest. So
we're still in playtesting. We're not done by any stretch of the imagination. Just to put that out, I guess I should give the standard, sort of potboiler disclaimer, which is that everything might change at some point before we're done. So I've been running primarily a private investigation detective duo, which is our sort of point of view character. Her name is Gilly Lowe. Gilda, as it were. If you think of her, she's kind of Nora Charles from The Thin Man, except bitter, divorced, and acquainted with sorcery. And her ex-husband. And then they have a criminal tag-along and a small boy, a character with a young hindrance that's kind of been adopted by Gilly. And it's all tied into sort of the mystery they're trying to solve, which is how her husband, who is with them trying to solve the murder, was killed. Because he was made dead before being undead, and he is legitimately undead in the zombie-ish sense. So we have a very mixed group, and they are generally all of one mind, just in terms of their skins are in hot water a lot because they know stuff that they shouldn't know, and knowing more is the only way to get themselves out of the hot water. So there's a lot of what's a good word for it? Two-fisted running for your life kind of stuff going on.
Okay, cool. That like I said, I was just intensely curious about how you constructed the adventures and put that together. So that's pretty cool. You guys aren't just doing one book. This is a twofer. You've got Bloodshadows, and then what's the other book there, Cameron?
So like you say, we've got the main core book for Chronicles of Guff, and then we've got what is currently titled Antagonists and Abominations, which is creatures of the city and the wilderness that are uncommon, monstrous, horrific, or otherwise problematic for player characters. And mundane threats, mundane being a very loose term in a world where, the guy down the street knows curses. But, so yeah, it's basically it's kind of the equivalent of our bestiary. We're not entirely sure yet. Some of the races that don't, like, classic Bloodshadows has just a metric ton of playable character races. Shifters alone, there's probably over a dozen shapeshifters, and some of them are probably not going to make it directly into the core book for space concerns. There's one player character race, for example, they're a shapeshifter, but their shtick is that they turn into inanimate objects like furniture.
Isn't that a mimic?
Basically, with more manners, maybe. Now they're like in a story about unraveling a mystery, like being able to turn into a chair and hang out and listen in on conversation can be pretty useful, but there's probably just not a lot of people out there who, when given the opportunity, are like, I want to be the guy that turns into a coffee table. So like that, for example, that race will make it most likely into the Antagonists and Abominations book. And depending on how much space we have, we might put how to make that a playable character race into that book as well. So there might be more utility to it than just as a monster book. We're still kind of hashing out those details.
Okay, cool. Sounds like we're still in the development phase. So when are you guys thinking, let's say I back Kickstarter tonight, when do I get the book showing up in my mailbox?
All right, probably about a year from now.
Okay.
And like we're fairly well along in conceptualization and writing. But we are not even, I would say, at a stage where I would suggest that any design element is final. I'm sure you guys all know that playtesting can really blindside you pretty significantly. So we're prepared for that. And also, we're still waiting on a lot of art. Like there's a lot to go. Mm-hmm. So we're estimating about a year all total for completion and fulfillment.
I think that's a very reasonable estimate for a Kickstarter. That's usually what we do for our bigger books. So I understand that. Cool. Well, this is a really exciting project. I'm looking forward to seeing this come to fruition. I want to make sure everyone has a chance. I've been accused of cutting these shows off too quickly sometimes, so I don't want to be Ricky Wrap It Up. I want to give everyone a chance to ask any questions, express any thoughts they might have. Jacob, Sean, anything but before we wrap it up?
I have no further questions. No.
Okay.
No, I've heard a lot of good and exciting stuff. It's always good to hear about a licensee that's bringing something new mechanically to Savage Worlds, more fun toys to bolt onto the system, and especially being able to riff off of what has come before. That's super cool.
we're definitely trying. Like we set out, like the first thing we said when we acquired the license was that this is not going to be a copy paste job. We're going to build everything from the ground up. It's going to be all new text, all new art, and we really wanted to treat the setting with sort of the love and care that a venerable old West End Games cult setting deserves. So we're trying to do justice to it. We're trying to do justice to Savage Worlds, and hopefully all you good folks out there will like what we do with it.
I'm sure they will. It's looking great so far, and I can vouch for Cameron. He does great work. He's done some work for us at Fading Go Games, including recently for the Lifter. So we've been always a pleasure to work with you, sir. You're a real pro, and I'm sure this Kickstarter is going to go well. You've already funded with 10 days left, so hey, I guess that begs the question: stretch goals? Are we talking about stretch goals yet?
Yeah, I mean we have them. So we have released the first 5. We are, of course, in the mid-campaign lull that comes with most Kickstarters. So I don't it's probably not only bad form, but also futile to try to guess what we may or may not unlock. But we do have coming up, we got permission from the good folks at Pressy Media to do full conversion docs for Masterbook and for genre diversion to Savage Worlds, so that, for example, if you happen to really love one of your other Masterbook settings from back in the day, and you really want to bring that over, you can use this document to do so. Same with your genre diversion. So this fully legal and licensed. It's going to be a beefy PDF. That is the first stretch goal. On the list as you go down, we've got a GM kit, including a starter adventure. We've got the improved cover art for the second book to give it a nice sort of streamline and stylistically matching look with the cover of the first book. And the big stretch goal, the 5th one that we're going for, is a full plot point campaign. And I believe that's at 18,000, which means that it is doable, but that we will probably need to get some momentum to get there. But we do want this to be a full line. So we're looking at books, even, hopefully we'd love to unlock the plot point campaign. But even above and beyond, we've got the authors lined up. We know what's going on there, because if it were just John and I trying to add a 3rd book on, we would not be hitting that 1-year date. So practically speaking, we had to make sure that we had the right authors involved in order to help us bring it to fruition if we get there. Should we somehow unlock that with still more time to go, we have further stretch goals continuing on down for quite a while. We didn't really know what to expect. Bloodshadows is it's a cult classic setting, but it's also been a long time, and there's a lot of other very popular sort of Kickstarters happening right now as well. There's a lot of competition. You just can never tell. So we erred on the side of caution and have probably way more stretch goals than we possibly need. But some of them are super cool. I will give one spoiler, which is that in the next batch of 5, should we through some miracle get there, we're doing a custom built adventure deck just for Bloodshadows, and designed specifically to be used with some of the more unique things that we're trying to do with the adventure deck in Bloodshadows. So that's my stretch goal spoiler for the night.
Oh, that's a BAMF podcast exclusive. All right. That's pretty cool. I got to say, I'm looking at 14K, the cover art by John Zlesnik for Antagonists and Abomination. I can't talk. Antagonists and Abominations. Why was I saying admonitions? Who says admonitions in casual conversation? Catholic priests, that's who. But yeah, John Zalesnik, that's amazing art for folks who might be having a senior moment like I am. John Zalesnik was the guy behind all those great covers you've seen on Riffs.
That's exciting.
Yep, and
Just
he is responsible.
fantastic work.
Yeah.
He is responsible for the cover for the Bloodshadows core book.
Really?
So, yeah.
Is that the picture on the Kickstarter page?
Yep.
Sweet. Yeah, that is an awesome image. Yeah. John's a heck of an artist. So, yeah, I would love to see more work by him any day of the week. That is really cool. So
Great artist, great guy so far. Yeah, you can't see the full cover, obviously. But what you don't see is that the character on the cover, which is Gilly Lowe that I was talking about before, she's currently holding a giant white cat named David, which has an interesting backstory of its own. It was the runt of the litter and killed its older siblings and is now her pet. So,
that fox she's wearing around her neck, that talks or something, right? Doesn't it?
So that is not fox. That is werewolf pelt. And she wears it specifically as a warning to undesirable unnaturals. She is not anti-unnatural, but this particular werewolf attacked her, and she used to be sort of a glitterazzi high society gal. So she got the idea in her head to send a message to any sort of unnatural being that might decide to mess with her. They might wind up as fashion as a consequence.
Yeah, that's fashion that makes a statement. All right.
Yes, it does.
That is pretty cool. All right. Well, we've been talking for almost an hour. It's been a real pleasure, Cameron. Sean, Jacob, I'm not cutting you guys off. Anything else you want to say before we call it a podcast?
No, I'm good.
All right. Cool. Cameron, closing thoughts before we call it a show.
Yeah, pretty straightforward closing thoughts. Thank you so much for having me on, guys. I've known you for quite a while, Mike, and you as well, Sean. It's great to actually put faces and voices to you guys. And yeah, it's just been a fantastic pleasure. Thanks for having me, and great to meet you, Jacob.
Great pleasure meeting you.
Yeah, look forward to seeing your work.
Thank you.
Cool stuff. All right, so I have to annoy everybody by playing our little musical outro. So forgive me if there's a contract with the musician. I have to do it. That's coming soon to iTunes, so look for it. So, all right.
And if you enjoy quality content like this, please support the BAMF podcast Patreon.
Indeed. And
Because
merchandise.
Mike keeps forgetting to say it.
I do. I got to start pimping our. We have a merch store. We have T-shirts and maybe stuffies. So we're still getting the negotiations with China done, but maybe. And going to be a fruit drink powder mix that's also going to be branded. Sorry, I'm making that last one up.
I keep advocating the fainting goat snack cakes, and I never see them.
It's complicated to sell baked goods over the internet. It really is. There's a lot of regulations. So anyway, folks,
for that.
Feel like you need to be selling some kind of obscure cheese, actually.
But the T-shirts do exist. Mine came in the mail. I have one.
All right. Back Bloodshadows is a good game, and we will see you next time on the BAMF podcast.